Hey, so guys, it's Red here with another Chainsaw Man video. This one's a bit more unique than my others since this one isn't really theorizing anything, but more about the manga itself as a series. And again, this video will be mainly about the title and about some other complaints that people have with part 2, which fit with the title/topic. Anyways, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to help me reach to 1.3k or even up to 2k sometime soon. So anyways, let's just get into this quickly. So, quote-unquote boring chapters. What are they? Well, it really depends on the person. Like, there's people who find the fights boring because there isn't any interesting dialogue, and then there's people who find all the dialogue and talking boring because there isn't any fights or any quote-unquote epic moments. Either way, I'm generalizing this too much because ultimately it's subjective. Your enjoyment of Chainsaw Man or literally any other series is your own. You can love, hate, whatever. It's your opinion. You get to decide what you enjoy and you have your own taste. You can find certain things boring and bad. Seriously. But what I'm getting at is that tastes are different and people find different things boring. But let's get into quote-unquote boring chapters. Why are they boring and why do we need them? Well, in reality, it's inevitable that a boring chapter will happen. Especially when there's over 200 chapters in this series. And obviously, there are things people look for in a series while others look for different things. But boring. What is boring? Well, boring is when... Okay, everyone knows what boring is, but what does it mean in a series like Chainsaw Man? Well, I think that quote-unquote boring chapters are generally agreed to be the ones that don't have any huge reveals / important stuff. Well, important to us, that is. But at the same time, that's not really it. So why are there quote-unquote boring chapters, at least to us readers? Well, it's because of multiple things from the story to even outside of the manga. A lot of people find setups boring, like setting up things with no immediate payoff. Us as humans love instant gratification. Obviously, we want all the answers and all the awesome reveals and stuff every time we read the manga. So, people find the manga boring when they don't see any importance or think that the manga doesn't have any goal or focus. Setup is important, even if it's building up for such a long time. But because of that build up and not revealing whatever is building up soon, people think that the series is aimless or that Fujimoto forgot about the plot. People complain that the setup takes too long to pay off, and they're kinda right, since on average we get 3 chapters a month. So setups do take a long time. Like how Power / the Blood Devil's comeback has been set up since before the end of part 1. Yet, we haven't seen the Blood Devil at all, only some glimpses of Power. So, some might think that Fujimoto forgot about Power / the promise to bring her back. But whatever, let's go back to the whole it takes too long for a payoff thing. The main problem is, again, to average it out, we only get 3 chapters a month. So it takes months or even years for a reveal with all that setup. I also think a lot of people, like me, binge read Chainsaw Man and eventually caught up with the manga. Being able to binge read the entirety of part 1 takes away the problem of waiting for the build up and then the reveal. So when it comes to part 2, we're stuck reading it weekly and bi-weekly, which causes us to think that certain sections are boring because they're in the middle of setting up and paying off that setup. But if I have to talk about that, we have to talk about pacing. Yeah, pacing is also a problem people bring up in part 2. So how could I explain that? Also, thank you Starkey for letting me see this tweet by replying to the OP. It got me to make this part of the video. Anyways, pacing is a problem people have with part 2. And I can see why. I mean, it does take a while for things to ramp up and stuff. But why is that? Well, in my opinion, there are 2 main factors when it comes to pacing problems in the series. One is time and the other is chapter length. Time is an enemy to all, and pacing. Obviously, the pacing will seem to be a ton slower when you have to wait for a chapter every week or two just to see what will happen next. And a lot of the times, it doesn't do any payoff and we're still in the building up stages, which causes people to get frustrated and think that the story isn't going anywhere since they have to wait a week or two for what is a quote-unquote nothing chapter. Then this brings up the second factor, the length of chapters. And this is a problem. Chapters have gotten shorter and shorter. Like, on average, Part 1's chapters were 18 to 19 pages long, while also getting some chapters be longer than average. Even Part 2 started with an average of 18 to 19 pages. But more recently, we've been getting less and less. Like, the more recent chapters being 14 to 15 pages long. That's a loss of 4 to 5 pages worth of a chapter. This is also not mentioning that before the current situation, chapters were around 16 pages long. So yeah, the reason people are complaining about pacing in Part 2 is because it takes longer for the build up, making the payoff come later. The mixture of reading Part 2 weekly and the length of their chapters is what makes people believe that there's a pacing problem. Like, a common thought is that Part 1 had a breakneck pace, while Part 2 is slow as hell. Thank you, Mr. Pokemon, for bringing this up. No, I won't be saying your full name, but then again, I am Latino, so some people wouldn't be surprised if I said it. But I won't, because I'm joking. Anyways, people get this opinion because they were able to binge read Part 1. So the pacing seems so fast because all the chapters blended in together due to Part 1 being whole and complete, while Part 2 as of now is still incomplete. But if they did read Chainsaw Man Part 1 while it was coming out, they also have to remember that most of the recent chapters have been significantly shorter than before, which again causes people to think that the pacing is whack, since they're not used to the shorter chapters. So all that makes it seem like Part 2 has super slow pacing. But this also allows one interesting thing about Part 2, the cycle of love and hate. Like, since the setup takes longer, the quote-unquote dry parts also last longer, which causes people to complain some more. But this also makes the payoff and all the crazy moments and the hype last longer because the chapters are shorter, which causes more praise for Fujimoto since the payoff is always explosive and awesome. Well, most of the time. But does this mean anything? I mean, it doesn't matter because people will have their opinions and criticisms even when we're in the quote-unquote good times. And that's completely fine. It's not like the manga is perfect. You can criticize the manga. It's your opinion. Like I said, you can like and hate things more than others. But let's get into that. More criticisms and problems people have. Now, again, to preface this, you can have your criticisms and problems with the manga. It's completely fine. But at least say why you have those problems. Just saying you hate it isn't a good reason. Especially if you haven't read the manga and only heard the discourse. So what are some other problems people have with the manga? One I've seen a lot is people are complaining about the cliffhangers at the end of chapters. In my opinion, I guess some of it is excessive, like sometimes you don't need that. And again, Chainsaw Man is a weekly manga and cliffhangers are used to keep people interested to read the next chapter that comes after. Like I said, I agree that sometimes it's too excessive and the cliffhangers just don't matter. Like this one that makes it seem like Yoru is gonna shoot Yoshida. But a lot of cliffhangers are also really interesting. Like, did you forget about this one? People really thought that Reze was coming back. Even if it was obvious, it still brought a lot of discourse and a lot of people started talking about it, which is what the series wants. It wants people to get the word out there and stuff. So it's not really a writing problem, but it's just a way to keep readers interested and hooked for the next chapter. Anyways, another one is with the writing. Some people have always had a problem with writing, whether certain scenes are happening like when Denji got assaulted and nutted on Yoru/Asa's hand, and Asa appearing less and less. And yes, I do know that the most recent chapter showed Asa doing something. I'm just saying that because a lot of Asa fans weren't happy that Asa stopped doing a lot of things. Now, what can I say about the writing stuff? Well, it's their opinions. Again, liking things is subjective and people can like and dislike whatever. But some people take it a bit far when it comes to this. Like the whole Denji Yoru thing in the alley. Some people were complaining about it and others were even enjoying it. One side hated it because Denji was being assaulted, while the other side loved it for the sexual nature and were glorifying the situation. So, are they both wrong? Kinda. Like, people can not like those scenes and it's fine, and people glorifying it and loving it are wrong because it's obvious. That scene was purposefully uncomfortable, and it was a bad thing that happened to Denji and Asa. The thing is, there are stuff you can critique about the series, but things like this aren't ones you should, unless they're pulled off in a bad way, which, in my opinion, Fujimoto didn't. Bad things happening in Chainsaw Man aren't because of bad writing. They're there because there has to be tension and problems. Chainsaw Man isn't a slice of life series, which is the next part of the problems people have with the writing. People seem to headcanon things, whether it's because of fan art and stuff like TikTok fans who don't actually read the series. But Chainsaw Man is not what they want it to be, so they complain. The series can have some slice of life aspects, but overall there isn't much about it. And yes, part 2 did have moments like this, even recently, but it's not a focus cause it doesn't fit with what Fujimoto wants. Now, a writing critique I kinda agree with is that none of the side characters, which means characters that aren't Denji or Asa and Yoru by the way, aren't really that good. Now, I will have to say that we did get more characterization for Yoshida, so it makes him a bit more interesting than in part 1. Another character I do like in part 2 is Fumiko. She is a bad person, but she was meant to be written that way, and that was the point of her character in the story. And then Death is also pretty good because she's supposed to be somewhat static and passive, and people seem to forget that she's the reason a bunch, if not every event in part 2 happened. Nayuta was also really great. She felt the closest to the cast of part 1 in my opinion. But again, the side cast just isn't as good as Aki and Power. Hell, even Himeno, Kobeni, and Kishibe seem to be way better than the side characters in part 2. And it's true, especially for Aki and Power. But why are they better written and better than any other characters, especially compared to part 2? Well, it's because Aki and Power were created to be a found family for Denji. Since part 1's story is from Denji's perspective, we get to see them more often and we get to have a connection with them. Because that's their role in the story. Their role was to feel like they were family, and then have them killed so that it would hurt us. To hurt Denji even more because that's what Fujimoto wanted. That's what Makima's plan was all about. So the reason we don't have that much connection with the sidecast of part 2 is because they were never meant to be close to the protagonist and the readers. Aside from Nayuta, who was like Aki in Power, we got connected and attached to her, like Denji, only for her to be snatched away from us and make us lose her. I think the themes of part 2 includes the themes of isolation and abandonment. To be all alone. The reason the protags, Denji and Asa, don't have a sidecast for us to care about is because they don't have anyone to care about either. The sidecast for part 2 isn't meant to be as lovable as the cast of part 1, because to the protagonist, they don't matter as much. The only people Denji and Asa stick together are themselves. Any other side character close to them is either manipulating them or causing them to just not be happy, or both. So while I do wish that the side characters were more expanded and better, like the many people who critique Fujimoto for that, I believe that it's thematic for there to not be any characters like Aki, Power, and even Nayuta in the lives of Denji and Asa. But again, that's my opinion. But one thing I have to say is that Fujimoto wanted to make part 2 different than part 1. So his writing style and themes would not be the same as what the readers expected from part 1. So if you dislike part 2 for being different than part 1, then you're missing the point that part 2 is supposed to be different from part 1. They were never meant to be the same in terms of writing and themes. But anyways, let's go on to the final critique I want to talk about. The art style. Yes, I get it. Late part 1 and early part 2 objectively look better, and again, liking or hating the current art style is a subjective thing. The current art style for part 2 seems to be more messy and doesn't look as polished as early part 2 and late part 1. This critique is very valid, but why is the art declining? Well, I believe I have some explanations, like the fact that Fujimoto has to work in such a strict schedule, as do other mangaka, and that his own life is very busy. It makes sense as why there's such a decline, as burnout is a thing. But what if there could be another explanation? Fujimoto just kinda wants to draw like that. It's his series and all. Why would it matter if it's not as good looking as before? I'm kidding, by the way. I personally have this little game theory that could explain some things about the art style change and the shorter chapters. My opinion, it's the anime. The anime affected Fujimoto since not only is he busy with making the manga, but he's also probably helping out with the production of the anime. From the Chainsaw Man movie coming soon, to even helping with the best movie of 2024, look back. I think that Fujimoto has been too busy, which means that his work has been more sloppy. Now, why do I think that? I mean, the first season came out while part 2 was already going. Well, here's the thing. Part 1 ended and then they announced an anime. But part 1 ended in December 14, 2020, while part 2 started on July 13, 2022. The anime released in October 12, 2022. So, while the first season of the anime was being produced, Fujimoto was on break from making Chainsaw Man. And the only thing he was working on was on one-shots like Look Back and Goodbye Eri. So basically that meant Fujimoto had a pretty clear schedule when it came to working. So that meant Fujimoto had the ability to easily help with the production of the anime, since his help for the anime was most likely done way before the anime and part 2 even came out. So then Fujimoto had the ability to focus on the manga, so his art was the best it's ever been. So what do I think? Well, the difference between before and now is that right now, Fujimoto is working on the manga right now, and also having to help out with some of the production of the anime. Fujimoto probably helped out with Look Back and probably helped out with the Resident movie as well. And maybe he's also helping out with season 2 of the anime as well. Fujimoto is more busy now than he was at the start of part 2. So his work has not been as good as before. And I think the recent chapters, especially chapter 206, helps this, because I think Fujimoto is done with helping the production of the anime, so he's back to only focusing on the manga. Like, look at this. This looks significantly better than before. Not only do the backgrounds look really good, thank you to the assistance of Fujimoto, but the characters also look way better than before. I mean, look at the shoes! They actually look good at a distance, unlike stuff like in chapter 161. Like, look at Nobana's shoes. Obviously, the shoes still look a little messed up, but you could see that there's some improvement. So, what do I think? Fujimoto has gotten less busy, so he can now put more focus on the manga.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game!
Anyways, what's next? Well, nothing. I finished the video. But I do have some final statements. I might be excusing Fujimoto's sloppiness and stuff. I might be glazing him. But again, this video is pretty biased. I mean, only I worked on this video and didn't get any opinions from other people. But what I do have to say is that you can criticize Fujimoto and Chainsaw Man. Obviously, this series ain't perfect and there's a lot of things that could be better. But this video was just me trying to explain some things about the criticism I've seen and trying to show that there are possible explanations and that not all the criticism I've seen is really that good. But again, you can criticize the series and give your own opinions. So maybe let me know about them in the comments below. I'd love to read them. Also, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Not to mention, become a channel member to help me out as well. Anyways, if you're new, make sure to check out my other videos and stay tuned for future videos. And by the time this comes out, I'm out on vacation in Mexico. But I won't stop grinding, even if I'm not at home. So thanks for watching.